Today I'm going to talk about 10 tips for writing an illustrated book proposal. And the fifth one and the 10th one are super important, so stick around for those. And in case you're wondering if you should take my advice, I'm the author of 14 books. Several of them have been New York Times bestsellers. They've won a bunch of awards, and they've been translated into over 18 different languages and sold over 1 million copies worldwide. And I've been making my living full-time as an author for over 20 years. But let's get right into it. My first suggestion for an illustrated book proposal is that you consider hiring a professional book designer, unless you happen to be a professional book designer yourself. Now, why is this important? Because a professional book designer will know how to use book fonts, which are different from the kind of fonts we use for word processing or that you might get out of a design program normally. And publishers really notice this. So you get them to typeset your proposal so that it looks like a book, and you get them to use standard book layouts and trim sizes. So let me explain why that's important. Here's some examples of some really great illustrated books that I love, and you notice they're all very different sizes. So publishers, when they're thinking about making an offer on your book, they have to price it out, and they have to put that in their paperwork that gets approved by the boss before they can start writing you checks. In order to do that, they need to decide ahead of time what the trim size is going to be, what the page count is going to be, whether it's hardcover or paperback, whether it's black and white or color. All those things factor into how much money they're going to pay you. So for that reason, you want to have thought that through a little bit. And a professional book designer will be able to work with you to figure out what is a typical trim size for the kind of book that you're writing, and also a typical trim size that that publisher is used to publishing. And this really matters for a lot of logistical reasons having to do with the printers they like to work with, even the kind of boxes that they ship books in. They're going to want to probably use a standard size that they use a lot, and it's important to know what that is. Okay, so those are some good reasons to hire a professional book designer. If you're worried about the cost of this, some suggestions I have to help keep the costs reasonable include finalizing all the text before you give it to them. So if this needs to be reviewed by your agent, anybody who needs to see it, you need to let them know this is your last chance to make changes to the text. Once it goes to the designer, it's a lock, and we're not going to make any changes to the text unless there's an obvious typo that got introduced at some point. So really make sure everybody understands that. Lock the text down, then that way they won't have to be going back and changing it every time you decide to rewrite a sentence. What I like to do when I work with professional book designers is give them a longer, flexible deadline than the rest of their clients. So it makes it easier for them to take my project on, because I'm like, look, I want you to know I'm working on this proposal. You can have a month or two. This is not urgent. I will be flexible. You can work me in around your other clients. I also give them lots of pictures of really great design comparables. So a design comparable is a book that is designed the way you imagine your book will be designed. So it does not have to be in your subject area. It does not have to be, it doesn't really have to have much of anything to do with the kind of book you're doing. It's just, this is the look that I'm going for. We're going to talk more about comps in a minute. So there's another kind of comp that publishers think about, but this is for the designer. So make sure that you have taken the time to find really good comps for them. Don't expect them to go buy these books. You need to take pictures or put a little Pinterest board together, something, so they can see examples so that they understand, like, you know, I'm going to want some pages that are black with images floating on them and white captions, or whatever it is. They need to have these references, and you need to be able to really point to which of these images pertain to which part of your proposal. That'll help them get it done faster. The other thing I do when I'm working with a professional book designer is that I promise them that there will only be one round of changes. So I sort of say, I trust you, I trust your vision, I love your work, That's why I want to work with you. I promise we're not going to go back and forth on this endlessly. So you can price this out to me as if, I'm going to get it. I'm going to be happy with it. I might ask for a couple small tweaks, but that's going to be it. And I understand that if bigger changes need to happen because maybe we changed our mind somewhere along the way or whatever, I'm going to be paying extra for that. So if you can do all that, then usually it can help the designer price it, hopefully in a way that's affordable for you. I'm going to tell you one example of how I did this, and I'm going to show you the proposal. So I wrote all of these novels. Now, the novels themselves are not illustrated, but they're based on a true story about a woman who was a deputy sheriff 100 years ago. And I wrote 7 books about her. And to do the proposal, I was submitting chapters that I'd written. So those went as a Word document, which is what you would normally do if you're writing a novel. But I also wanted publishers to see pictures of the real people because I wanted them to really get it. Like I thought, a busy editor who's opening their inbox on Monday morning and a bunch of new proposals have come in from agents over the weekend, they're not going to have a lot of time to engage with each one. So rather than just say, hey, this is based on a true story, I'm like, I want you to see some pictures so you can see these people and you can get an immediate vibe about them in the book. So I went to a book designer that I had worked with before, and I said, look, I want something that looks like an old scrapbook, so I want these pictures, and I just want little captions, and I just want it to look sort of cool and antique and vintage, and I promise I'm going to love whatever you do. I promise I'm not going to ask you for a lot of changes. I'm going to give you all the text for every caption, every picture, and just make it look fabulous. And she did. And it didn't require a lot of back and forth. So it was affordable. She was happy to squeeze it in between other projects. I also, like I said, I didn't give her a super tight deadline. I was like, this book will go, the proposal will go out when it goes out. We've got some time. So even if you're writing a book that's all text that doesn't have any pictures in it at all, sometimes there's a reason why you may want to include images or design elements. So that basically when we submitted this proposal, it was a Word document with the sample chapters and all the other information. And then it was this PDF, which was just something for them to flip through so they could kind of see who these women were and see some of the old newspaper headlines and other cool stuff. Okay, so other suggestions for your illustrated book proposal is your proposal, if it's like a PDF, it's going to have a cover on it, right? Like there's going to be a first page. Make it look like a book cover. And here again, this is where it's really helpful to use a professional book designer because they understand how to make a professionally designed book cover like this or like this. I mean, these people do this for a living. So if your proposal can have a kind of great looking cover on it, it doesn't mean that it's going to end up being the cover for the book, but it's just visually more compelling, and hopefully it immediately gives the editor who's considering buying this proposal, it immediately gives them a sense of, oh, I see what the vibe is for this book. Like, this is another book of mine that was illustrated. I did not illustrate this one, but you can imagine if you have a cover that's something like this, that people immediately get like, ooh, this is a weird, creepy book about plants, right? So, okay, book cover. I also recommend a table of contents. So just like a book has a table of contents, you can have a table of contents for your proposal. And it can be really short like this. It can just be contents and then just 4 things, maybe it's introduction, sample chapters, bio and more information, whatever your proposal consists of. If you can do something like this to help them navigate it, I think that's a great idea. And make it look cool, like make it look like a professional, a professionally designed table of contents. Okay. Number 4, I suggest including every type of page spread that's going to be in your book. So let me give you an example from my book, The Tree Collectors. This is a book that I wrote and illustrated, and there's a few different types of page spreads. So there's profiles of the people. So it's a portrait of them. and the text starts on this page, and then it continues over to a second 2-page spread that's got a second illustration on it. So that's one type of page layout that's in this book. But another type of page layout are what they call interstitials, which are kind of like little bits of information with, in my case, little illustrations. So it's a good idea to have a couple of examples of interstitials so they can see what that is like. And then the other thing, this is sort of optional, but in my case, there were many parts to this book. There were like, the book was divided into like part 1, part 2, part 3. And I had these kind of page spreads for the parts. So as much as you can visualize that kind of thing ahead of time and really think it through, and show them that, then it helps them to understand, again, what kind of book it is, what the market for it is, what your vision is, and hopefully gets them excited about it, because ideally your proposal looks a lot better than everything else that landed in their inbox. All right, include every type of page spread. That was number 4. Okay, so this is number 5, and this is a big, important one, which is the text itself that you're going to write about this book. You need to write that text in the voice that the book is going to be written in. This is a mistake that a lot of authors make, and I, you know, I understand why it happens. Like, you're in proposal mode, and so your writing might be a little bit businessy, or it might just read kind of in a normal, bland, conversational sort of tone. But in fact, from the first word that an editor reads on your proposal, they should immediately be in the mood of the book, the vibe of the book. Like, they need to be in that world. And so, just as an example, like with Wicked Plants, this is a creepy book about creepy plants. So the proposal, as I started to write the proposal, it had to sound creepy from the get-go. So like, the proposal began like this, and also this is how the introduction begins. It says, "Consider yourself warned. A tree sheds poison daggers, a glistening red seed stops the heart, a shrub causes intolerable pain, a vine intoxicates, a leaf triggers a war. Within the plant kingdom lurk unfathomable evils." Right? So immediately we get super creepy, I'm there. So that voice really matters. And if your book is fun and lighthearted, or whatever it is, make sure that your text reads like that. Now, if you're struggling with that idea, and you're just struggling with how to even pitch your book and what the text part of your proposal should really be, I want to give you a couple of suggestions here. I want to spend a little time on this issue and really think about it. So one is, what you're doing is you're making the case for why this book needs to exist and why people need to read it, are going to want to read it, So it is a little bit of a sales pitch, but it's also a sales pitch to the reader, right? It's sort of saying to the reader, here's why you're going to want to come along with me on this journey. So because of that, a lot of times what an author writes in their book proposal, that chunk of text that is sort of the meat of the proposal, that often ends up serving as the introduction to the book. So in all of these books I've written, if you go and you read the introduction, this one begins with a question: what possesses someone to possess a tree? This pretty much comes straight out of the book proposal. Like, it's tightened up and greatly improved, because generally authors write their introduction last after they've written the whole book, because then you know what it is you're introducing, right? Kind of makes sense. So it's better than what was in the book proposal, but it's basically the same language. So if you need help figuring out what should be in your book proposal in terms of text, go read the introduction to some similar comparable books that you think are, close enough to yours that it would give you, just give you some hints. Basically, everyone's book introduction is a little secret window into probably what was in their proposal. So go check those out, and you'll get some ideas. Yeah, and format it so that visually it looks like an introduction. Like, let me see, I'm sure this book has an introduction. So like, make it look kind of lovely. Make it, again, this is why you want a professional book designer. You want to say like, format this section so that it looks like the introduction to a book. Okay, that's number 5. Number 6, usually in a book proposal, there's going to be a certain amount of, after you've done the like, hey, let me tell you all about my book, and let me tell you how much I love, why I think you're going to love this book. After you've done that chunk of text, usually there's kind of a section of your book proposal that's going to be a lot of little lists. It's going to be like lists of other books I've written, lists of other types of projects I've done or clients I've worked for, lists of media appearances that I've made. Maybe you have, stuff like that. So those types of lists, try to, again, format those as if they belong in the book, right? So like think about, a chart or a table or a list and how you can kind of make that text, even if you need to list like how many social media followers I have. And so you're listing your various social media accounts and numbers of followers. Think about formatting all of that in kind of a cool way, in like little charts, tables. If you're doing a book that's going to have a lot of hand lettering, maybe you hand letter some of that. I mean, in this book, for instance, there ended up being little tables like this occasionally. Maybe you could just draw on an element like that. But again, make it look visually cool and make it feel like it lives within the visual world that you envision the book living in, because you can really use those kinds of things to point to later in the process when you're having conversations about design. You can sort of say like, well, look, here's an example, like how I formatted this is how it could be. Okay, so all those things, all those kind of lists and stats and little bullet points that you need to make about yourself and, how you're going to promote the book, audiences for the book, things like that. Just format all that stuff in a way that fits within the visual world of the book as well. And then also, you're going to need to include your bio, right? And you can format that to look kind of like an About the Author page. So in this case, for instance, I decided that rather than do an author photo for this book, I would draw my own portrait with a tree, because this is a whole book full of people with portraits of people with their trees. So I did my own, and there's my little bio. So you might be including a longer bio than this, so that your publisher can really get to know you, but write it so it sounds like it belongs, right here on the back of the book. And whether you include a photo or not is a question maybe for your agent. I often don't, but make it look like an About the Author page is my suggestion. Okay, that was number 7. Number 8, if within your book proposal, you're going to have like the introduction, you're going to have some sample chapters, you're going to make sure, like I said earlier, that you have samples of all the different page spreads. But it might be important to let your publisher know that you've thought through everything else that's going to go in the book, right? You're not just giving these samples and going, well, let's just see what else I come up with. I mean, hopefully you've already really thought about it, and maybe you want to like list all those other things, like all the other things that belong in this section are the following. So when you do that, and I just want to try to give you an example of that. Well, I'll just take one of mine again, Wicked Bugs. I might want to let my publisher know that I'm going to have a whole section about ants. I'm going to have a whole section about, I have a section in here called bookworms, which are bugs that eat books. So all of those, I'm not giving them, the book proposal isn't supposed to be the whole book. It's just supposed to be a few samples, but I can let them know I've already thought this through. And what I think is I'm going to have a section called bookworms that's going to be all the bugs that eat books. I'm going to have a section about ants, which I'm going to call The Ants Go Marching. I'm going to have, a section called The Enemy Within, and here's what that is. So I'm just going to kind of list all those So you might have these moments in your book proposal where you visually need to let the editor know, hey editor, this is for you. This is to let you know, also this section will include the following, kind of. But again, format that nicely, put a little border around it, maybe drop a little illustration in it. So they're getting all the information, but they understand that this is sort of addressing the editor directly to let them know what else is going to be in that section. Okay, that was number 9. So now we get to the super important number 10, which is about comps. So I think of comps in 2 different ways. I think of them the way publishers think of them, and I think of them the way authors and illustrators think of them. So when a publisher says, what are the comps for this book? What they're looking for are similar books that are either on the exact same subject or a very adjacent subject. So let's say, you're writing a cookbook and it's desserts. There might be a bread cookbook. There could even be a book about cocktails. There could be, something else in the cookbook world, but your comps are going to be cookbooks if you're writing a cookbook, period. And they need to be recent and they need to be successful. And if you're not sure whether they're successful or not, talk to your agent about, there's different ways to find that out. I'll give you just a few shortcuts. One is if you go to the bookstore, like a real physical bookstore, not online, and you look at these books, there's always a copyright page. At the bottom of the copyright page is usually a number line, and this tells you how many printings the book has gone through. So usually the lowest number here is how many printings. And so in my case, 18 is the lowest number. So that means this book has been through 18 printings. That's a successful book. You can look at Amazon rankings and things like that, but also your agent might have access to BookScan or other databases that let them look up and see how many copies a book has sold. Because I guarantee you, when your editor gets your proposal, they're going to look at your comps and they're immediately going to go look them up in BookScan and go, oh, this book only sold 5,000 copies. Like this is not working for us. So for a publisher's perspective, a comp is recent, sold well, and is in a very similar category to the book you want to write. For you as an author, your idea of comps can be very different, and it's important that you have them, and you can even sometimes talk to your editor about them, but they are generally not for your book proposal. So your own personal comps are the books that inspire you and that really make you want to make this book better. And as an artist, these could be books with a really fantastic design. So like, I love this book. I think it's so beautiful. It's so beautifully designed. So this is a great design comp, but maybe it's so far off from the kind of book you're writing that it doesn't work for publishers as a comp. But you should still have it. Like you can still have this in the back of your mind as something that you're going to keep at your desk and you're going to look through and you're going to be inspired by. You can even show these page spreads to an editor or a designer, possibly after you've already sold the book. This isn't something that necessarily has to happen before, and you can go, hey, I really love the way they handled this on this page. Looks like I'm going to have a page like this in my book. Can we do something similar? And I'm going to send these pictures to you. So your own personal comps are just like your own personal little cheerleading squad. The books that really motivate you, make you want to do this, but not necessarily books that belong in the proposal as comps for the editor. And a big piece of this when you're doing comps is to remember that publishers are going to want to know about page count, word count, and illustration count. So when you're putting forth comps, one of their questions is going to be, are you really seeing this being such a long book? Are you seeing it like you listed this as a comp? It has a lot of text. It doesn't look like your book is going to have so much text. So how many words are we talking about? how many illustrations are we talking about, and how many pages. They need all that information to kind of price it out and also to put in the contract. So if you don't know the answer to those questions, then finding books that are similar to yours that you think are going to look the way yours look, and then sit there, and if you have to, count words. You might need to count, a paragraph, and then you just can multiply that out to get at an estimate of about how many words is on a page like this. And you got to kind of map that out and really figure out, okay, I think that's going to be about this many words on a page. I think there's going to be this many illustrations. I'm going to have some 2-page spreads that look like this. I'm going to have some 4-page spreads that look like that. And so when I string all that out and I account for, front matter and back matter, which means like introduction, table of contents, appendix, index, recommended reading, whatever that goes at the back of the book, when I string all of that out and put all that together, I come up with, roughly a 240-page book or whatever it's going to be. One pro tip is that books are printed in signatures, which means very large pieces of paper that are folded and cut. So what that means is that generally your book is going to be, the page count is going to be a multiple of 16 or maybe a multiple of 8 if they end up doing a half signature. So if you really want to look like a professional, you're going to make sure your page count is a multiple of 16 or a multiple of 8. So get all that together, make sure you know it, make sure you're confident about it, and make sure that goes in the proposal, probably with the comps or else in another section where you're listing all the specs, like I'm envisioning this as a book with, this particular trim size, and it would be hardcover, and it would be however many pages. I don't know what we ended up with here, 300 something pages. It's going to have 60,000 words. It's going to have 100 illustrations plus assorted spot art, that kind of thing. Those are the sorts of things you want to include. Okay, so those are all my suggestions for how to put together an illustrated book proposal, and that's for whether your book is illustrated or not. Another thing, I just wanted to add this right at the end, is that you might be writing a book but not illustrating it yourself, in which case, if you don't have an illustrator that you're bringing on board with you, it's not sort of a package deal, one thing you can do is just find examples of illustrators you like, just to sort of say, I'm envisioning it looking kind of like this. With this book, for instance, we brought in an outside designer, and we left it up to her to just sort of find the art. So she made stuff like this, which really worked out very well, and it just looks fantastic. She came up with all this stuff. But to the extent that you can have ideas about who the illustrator or designer might be, or just similar types of work, like I would love to find someone who does this kind of art. I don't know who that might be, but I'm looking for a person, I'm envisioning a person kind of like that for the art. Then that can be really helpful for the books that you're not illustrating. And then finally, remember, even if you're writing a book that has no illustrations at all in the book, there might be a reason why you want to include some visuals. And if so, I hope all these tips are helpful for that as well. So thanks for watching. If you liked this, you can hit like, you can subscribe, and also I send out a newsletter every week and I teach some online classes, so I will put links to all that below. Thanks.